We're going to begin this session with this little quotation here on the screen. Now, can you say truthfully, have you ever said something like this? And if you have never said it, have you ever heard anybody else saying something similar to this section on the board, on the screen? Somebody saying yes, sure, yes, yes. So, this typical, I mean, I think you could read it in newspapers mainly, people complaining about young people, okay? So children just love the easy life, they're bad-mannered, they show contempt for authority, disrespect for their elders, they answer back to their parents, and they drive their teachers mad. So maybe you haven't said it, but maybe you've heard somebody saying it. Somebody has mentioned this is from ancient times. Now, I don't know if you know this, but this was Socrates, okay? So this is a quotation from Socrates, who, as you can see, said this a long, long time ago, okay? And I've got another one. This is even better, okay? I see no hope for the future of our people if they are dependent on the frivolous youth of today. When I was young, we were taught to be discreet and respectful of elders, but today's youngsters have no respect. Does anybody know who said this? It wasn't Socrates. Anybody guess? It was actually Hesiod, okay? And that was from the 8th century BCE, okay? Now, I like starting sessions about teaching teenagers with these two quotations, because as several of you have said in the chat box, the generation gap. And I think it's always good for our sanity to remember that, that teenagers can be quite a difficult age group to teach. They're my favorite age group to teach, definitely. They can be quite difficult, but really we have to remember that, that adults have always looked at teenagers in a different way. And teenagers also look at adults in a different way. There is a generation gap. And I think it's worth remembering this when we talk about teaching teenagers. The first point to say is that we are no longer teenagers. I imagine you're like me, that you are no longer a teenager. And I think it's always a good idea to remember and to take it philosophically, like Hesiod and Socrates, that it's good to remember that, some of the problems we face with teaching teenagers, it's not a personal question between you and the students. It's simply that we are different. And I think that helps me often to stay calm when things are going wrong in teenage classes, because this is not a new question. We tend to think that today's teenagers are worse than teenagers ever. But of course, we can see from these quotations that people have always believed that. Now, we are going to look at teaching teenagers in detail. Before we do, because this is the first of 3 sessions, I just wanted to point something out that I think is very important to point out. In these sessions, I'm going to generalize about teaching. I'm going to generalize about teaching teenagers. I'm going to generalize about the whole situation, because there is no other way to do a talk about teenagers without generalizing. But I certainly never forget that it's all relative. There are lots of relative questions. Maybe your teenage class in, I don't know, in Slovakia is not the same as a teenage class in Uruguay. Maybe the class in a capital city is not the same as a class in a small city, maybe or a town in the country. Teaching teenagers is different if you're in a private language school or in a private one-to-one class, or if you're in a large state school. Even there are differences between one school and the next. Okay, so I'm very aware that this school might have more discipline problems and a school over the road might have fewer. Even in the same school, you sometimes have 2 classes of the same age and you teach them both and you wonder why this class is totally different from the other class. Classes which are larger also are different from classes which are smaller or which are one-to-one. Classes on a Monday are not always the same as a class on Friday afternoon or Wednesday afternoon. Where I teach at 8:30 in the morning, some of my students are still asleep. In the middle of the afternoon, they're very different. And, all of these differences, I am aware of these differences. Also, I think there are many differences between us as teachers. Some of us are older, some of us are younger, some of us are completely new to teaching teenagers. Some of us have been doing it, in my case, for 35 years. We're all different people. Some of us are more maybe louder, some of us are quieter, some like discipline, some don't like discipline. And lots of us have different beliefs about what we believe is education and what should teenagers be like. So all of those differences, and now we have other differences about teaching face-to-face or teaching online and hybrid teaching situations. I was just explaining to Will that at the moment I have 2 lessons. One is face-to-face and the other is online. And of course, the dynamics are different. So I know that you know this, but I just want to make it very clear that when I generalize, there are lots of differences. And what I want you to do then, and this is very important, we're saying this is a masterclass, but what I want you to do is to feel free to question what I say. You don't have to agree with everything I say. This is my experience from 35 years of teaching. I have been a teacher in private language schools. I've taught one-to-one. I've been a director of studies in a private language school. And for the last 20 years, I have been teaching in a secondary school. So this is what I think. These are my ideas, but you're free to question what I say. You're free to ask questions about what I say. And of course, you're free to adapt. So, take what I say, think about what I say, and maybe you feel that you need to adapt it so that it works for you because you're different from me, and it works for your students who are also maybe different from your students. Okay, so again, actually, having said all of that, I think there are lots more similarities between all of us and between teenage students around the world than differences. But I think it's worth remembering that there are these differences. And the last thing that I want before I begin my session, and I need to hurry up now because yes, an hour is an hour, okay? So I'm going to talk about so many things. I'm going to talk about so many important things, and we only have 1 hour. So, I could speak for 6 hours about what I'm going to speak about today. Hopefully, I'm going to give you some ideas for you then to think about, to consider, to look at in the post tasks. And as I say, today, for the people who've just joined us, hello, Nani from Mexico. Great that you're here. What I also mentioned at the beginning of this session is if you do want to stay around and discuss these things with your colleagues and possibly even with myself, then stay around at the end where we're going to have some breakout rooms, okay, so that you can all get involved and say what you would like. Okay, now we're going to do this opinions dictation, okay? This is a great activity to do with your students too. You can have some statements, you read out the statement and the students put it in the column I agree, I disagree, or it depends. Today, you don't have to write it down, okay? Just think, but I'm going to give you some statements and I want you to tell me if you like in the chat box, do you agree with the statement? Do you disagree? Or do you think it depends? If it depends, you could maybe put some ideas down of what it depends on. Now, point number 1, my statement number 1, you should know your school's policy towards problems such as lateness, use of smartphones, not doing homework. Do you agree, disagree, or it depends? Okay, well, I can see straight away that we've got pretty unanimous agreeing. And somebody's mentioned that they've seen me maybe on a YouTube video asking this statement too. Right, for me, okay, very important. For me, number 1, this is essential, okay? If you're a private teacher with your own classes, this is not a problem. But basically, anybody who works in a school, an institution, a private language school, I think this is essential. You need to know, before you begin to teach, You need to know what the norms, what the regulations, what the rules are in your school. Because if you don't know, you're going to get into trouble. You're going to get into trouble with the institution, and you're going to get into trouble with your students, because you can't ask your students things to do if the school doesn't agree. And you can't tell students not to do something if the student doesn't agree. If the school doesn't agree, sorry. Sometimes schools have problems because their own rules are not very clear. Their own rules are very ambiguous, or their rules are not actually carried out, okay? But basically, I think this is really useful when you begin. If you're a new teacher, as soon as you start working in a new school, find out what the rules and regulations are, because you need to know. And I do believe that schools work much better when all of us work in the same direction, when we all know what we can and what we can't do. I'm talking about teachers, not just students, but when we all know what we can and what we can't do, everything is much clearer. So number one, personally, and this is my opinion, this is something that I agree with completely. What about number two? You should negotiate classroom rules with the students. Agree, disagree, or it depends? Most people are saying agree. Some people are saying it depends. Okay, and I'm going to tell you what I think. I think that it depends. I think it depends because it goes back to my first statement. There are certain things that maybe I cannot negotiate with my students because the school says that it's something they have to do. Also, there are certain things that I want my students to do that I will not negotiate. So I will not negotiate if they can, I don't know, they can suddenly stand up in the middle of the lesson and dance around. That is non-negotiable, okay? A silly example, but it's important. There are certain things that you will not negotiate. There are certain things that I personally will not negotiate. Now, it's quite nice if there are some other things, and I think that's nice if you can give certain amount of choice to your students and involve them. But I think it depends on what the rules are. So in other words, big rules I don't usually negotiate, generally because I have no choice, because my school doesn't let me negotiate either. If it's small things like, you know, shall we, how many days would you like me to give you to hand in an essay? You know, if I give you an essay on Monday, how many days would you like? Okay, so my feeling is that the big rules are non-negotiable. Certain things that I want are non-negotiable because I am the teacher and I think I know best. But smaller things, I think, depends on what you, you know, there might be smaller things that you feel are negotiable, which then give the students the feeling, if you like, that they are part of the rules of the class. Yeah, Angelina has mentioned depends on the maturity of learners in school. Yeah, definitely. And of course, remember, one thing to remember, I'm always talking about teaching teenagers, okay? Because obviously with adults, this is a totally different question, I think. Whereas for a teenager, you know, I think personally that some things are non-negotiable. Now, my third one is you should always remember that you're the adult in the room. Agree, disagree, or it depends? So number three, agree, agree. I mean, I hope that everybody would generally agree that that you are the adult in the room. We talked about Socrates and we talked about teenagers. I think the point here is that when students get angry sometimes, don't they? Sometimes students act in an irresponsible way because they are teenagers. The question is that you are the adult in the room. You are the person who is in charge. And in that case, then you're not going to get angry. You're not going to lose control because you are the control in the lesson. Okay. And I would say again, sometimes people are saying depends on the age. Yes. I mean, you know, again, obviously there is a big difference between a 12-year-old and an 18-year-old. But even again, in the case, to be honest, of 17, 18-year-olds, personally, I believe that you are the person who is in charge and you are the responsible adult. Yeah, Thelina has just said, you're the one in charge. Okay, now the next one, number four, you should not smile too much early on in the year with a new group of students. This is always an interesting one, okay? Disagree, disagree, disagree. Most people are disagreeing here. Yes, I disagree too. I find it very difficult not to smile. If I feel happy, I smile. I think, of course, with this question of number 4, because you hear this a lot, I think there is a tiny piece of good advice in this. I always smile, so I disagree. I suppose the tiny bit of useful information here, and I think this is true, is that it's better to be a little bit more in control at the beginning of the year. And when you find that things are going well, you can relax control a little bit more when you see that the students are with you. But I think this is the typical thing. I think the reason I disagree with number 4 completely, but I think the reason that people talk about this is because if you become a pal of your students, your teenage students, very, very quickly, you become one of them, then I think in the end, you're going to find that you're going to have problems getting students to do what they need to do, what you want them to do, because they're a little bit out of control. So smiling, I think, is a great thing because the students see that you are human, and that the students see that you enjoy being there, which is essential. Maybe the only thing is that when you begin teaching a new group, it's always good to be a little bit more in control than a little bit more relaxed, in my opinion. Yeah, Katerina said, don't get too friendly, it's dangerous. And I do believe, I know that people will say, no, you should be friends. Yes, you should be friendly, definitely. There's the question then is that you are the teacher before you are their friend. Okay, so you're the teacher first, and then friend could be afterwards. Now, I've got some others that I'm going to go through more quickly. Number 5, you should not admit that you don't know an answer or apologize for the mistakes you make. Number 5, do you agree or disagree? Okay, number 5, most people are saying disagree, right? And I agree with you that you should disagree. Of course, if you don't know an answer, that's not a problem. Just tell them that you don't know and that you will find out the answer. That's the important thing. If you make a mistake, I think it's a great thing if you apologize. You are being a great role model to your students. We all make mistakes, and if you admit that, then that's a good thing. Obviously, if you're continually making mistakes and if you continually never know the answer, then maybe you're in the wrong profession. Because if you get everything wrong and you're continually making mistakes, then it's probably a problem. Maybe you should become a plumber or something. But otherwise, if it's like from time to time, then what is the problem with admitting that you've made a mistake or that you don't know, and then find out the answer? That's the important thing. You might not know the answer today, but tell them that you will find out and tell them tomorrow. Number 6, people are already saying they agree, okay? And me personally, I also agree. I think it's really important, especially in terms of classroom management, in terms of control. If you say that you're going to do something, if you say that you're going to punish them if they continue to do something, you should do it. If you say you're going to show them a film next lesson, then you should do it, unless there's a very good reason that you can explain why not. Basically, when you do what you say you're going to do, generally students will begin to trust you. They will begin to believe in you and know your limitations. Whereas, for example, if you're making threats but never actually doing anything about them, then you're going to get into trouble. Number 7, you should spot examples of good work and behavior and let students know you've spotted them. Personally, I agree with this wholeheartedly. Again, that doesn't mean praising things that do not deserve praise. It's simply meaning that, yes, we generally as teachers remember to spot all the things that are wrong when somebody's doing something that they shouldn't do. And sometimes we forget to say, yeah, that was exactly right. Well done. Yeah, I liked the way that you worked in pairs there. You did it really well. And actually, personally, I must say now that in terms of online teaching, I think I'm doing that more than ever. I think with online teaching, you really need to encourage your students by saying, yes, thank you, that was great, well done. Again, only when it's true. If it's not true, then don't say it. But if it is true, show students that you know that they've done something well. Why not? There's nothing to lose by saying, yes, that was well done. One thing also I think that is important is the same student can do something completely wrong 1 minute and completely right 5 minutes later. Let's treat both of those examples the same way. Just because they did something bad before doesn't mean they can't do something good now. And number 8, the last one, you should try to limit discipline problems by planning classes and activities carefully. Lots of people are saying agree. Some people are saying depends. Personally, I think that the better you have planned your lesson, you will probably, not definitely, you will probably have fewer discipline problems. You might change your lesson plan completely. You might decide to abandon your lesson plan. That's fine. But I would say that generally, you've noticed that I'm saying limit discipline problems. I'm not saying get rid of them, but I think that the better you're planning, the fewer problems you should have. And we'll talk about lesson planning at the end of this session today. Okay, so those are some questions just to get you starting to think about the whole idea of classroom management, okay? Like I said before, there are tons of things we could say apart from that, but I think that's the starting place for me of some rules of classroom management. Now, in this session, you're going to see lots of these keys, and these keys are basically my suggestions for what I think help to make a successful class for teenagers. And the very first thing, my very first key, is all about involving students. And this is not just about teaching teenagers, and it's not just talking about English. We have this famous quotation, "Tell me and I forget, teach me and I may remember, involve me and I learn." And, you know, for me, this is the beginning, this is the starting point of all teaching. The more involved your students are, the more they're going to learn. I have no doubt about that. And even if they don't learn, like I've said here, at least they won't get bored, they won't start daydreaming, or they won't start causing problems. So I think that really, you know, key number one of any successful lesson, whether it's online or whether it's face-to-face, key number one is making sure that students are involved. There is no reason for the teacher to be talking all the time. There is no reason for the teacher to be doing all of the exercises all the time. The lesson is designed, and my books are designed so that the students do the work, not you. You already know the English. What we need is our students to be involved and to be doing exercises. This is an example from the B1 level of my latest series for teenagers, which is just out. And presentation of vocabulary, okay? So the presentation, maybe the teacher is quite involved in the presentation, explaining the words, helping students to understand the words. But you'll notice this box here in the middle. Use it, don't lose it, which I think is a great expression, isn't it? That's a lovely expression in English, so I've used it in my new book. Use it, don't lose it, because this is it. If you use English, you will remember it. You will, you know, by being involved in the activity, the language will stick, because you will make the language yours. So what we do on the last activity is to get the students to use this new vocabulary, whether it's vocabulary or whether grammar, get the students to actively use the language in speaking, talking about themselves, so that they are becoming internalized. The language is becoming internalized. So the simple key is that the more the students use language, the more they will remember. Okay, so use it, don't lose it. Another thing that I think is really essential with teenagers much more than adults, is structuring activities so that they have very clear, concrete objectives and that they are very clearly structured. Now, I'm going to give you an example. If you look at this, do you think this is a good classroom instruction in a group of teenagers? Let's say we've got a group of 25, 13-year-olds. Do you think this is a good activity? Somebody said too vague. Isabel said straight away too vague. And lots of people are saying no, vague. Yeah. Now, for example, I learned this the hard way. I used to do this because I was used to teaching adults. If you say this to motivated adults, that's fine. They will talk straight away because they're there, because they want to be there. And that's it. But I discovered when I asked my students this, they finished in 5 seconds exactly. Okay, in 5 seconds they finished. And I said, well, what did you talk about? I says, oh, well, we don't usually do anything after school. No. So they would go like, what did you do? What do you usually do after school? And they go like, pff, pff, pff. And that is all the conversation that we had. So I think that's not a great activity because it's not very structured and there is no specific goal. So what I think is best for teenagers is something like this. Okay, this I think is a much better instruction. Find at least 5 things that you and your partner usually do after school. Okay, now it's the same activity in essence, but I think it's better for these reasons. It's better because we have a specific goal. Okay, we're saying find 5 things. Okay, so they can't just do 1, they can't just do 2, they do 5. Okay, so we've got a clear goal, a specific goal. It's also better than that because it's open-ended. And I'll come to this again in a minute, the question of mixed abilities and fast finishers. Okay, but if you say find at least 5 things, that means that nobody can say that they've finished, okay? Because after they have 6 things, then they can find 7 things. And after they find 7 things, they can find 8 things, okay? So that's a little trick that I suggest you use. Just use the expression at least, okay? Because at least means that you can't actually finish. And then thirdly, I think it's nice also because we are promoting empathy, which I've been talking about recently with social and emotional learning. So you're finding things that you have in common with your partner. So even maybe you're sitting next to Pablo and you think that you don't really have anything in common with Pablo, but this activity is making you realize that, yes, okay, so we both have some chocolate after school. We both like watching football after school. So we're promoting empathy too. So what I'm trying to suggest is that it's the same activity as before, but with teenagers, if you give a clear goal, a specific goal, then you're going to make the exercise better. As I said before, I don't think adults have any problem talking about anything. You could say to your adult students, talk about what you did at the weekend, and they might do it for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. But I think that if you ask the same question to teenage students, you're not going to get the same response. Alina has mentioned that if the students don't like their partner and don't want to speak to them, I don't really sort of accept that in my class. Liking your partner has no question. We're practicing English. So if you hate your partner, it makes no difference to me. You're going to be evaluated on your English, and so you're still going to have to do it. And I think that's useful to remember, really, is almost just giving those clear instructions. Liking your partner is not obligatory, and we can't make it happen. But doing the activity is obligatory. Okay, now another thing that I think is really important with teenagers, it's important with adults too, but I think it's also really particularly useful for teenagers. You've got to listen to what the students are saying, not just how they say it. So you need to decide, how are you going to correct? It depends on the activity. If it is a grammar exam, you're going to correct only the grammar, right? But let's imagine that you're doing a speaking activity. Okay, now I've shown this, I remember showing this in Slovakia and other different countries. I've given a talk around the world about teaching grammar. And people always find this funny, but it's not just a joke, actually. So we've got this, how are you today, Ivan? So you imagine the beginning of the class, you ask your 13-year-old student, how are you? And Ivan says, very bad. Yesterday, my father had an accident. And then you, the teacher, you say, no, Ivan, that's terrible. Okay. And then you say, it should be, my father had an accident. Okay, now what do you think about that? Is that good correction? Poor Ivan. Okay, it's terrible, isn't it? It is terrible. Now, this is a joke. Now, if you want to get even worse, you could say past simple for a single completed action with a specific time reference. Now, this is a joke, but it is true. I'm convinced that all of us, myself also, I'm convinced that we think often as English teachers, we think in terms of grammar, we think in terms of mistakes, we think in terms of, accuracy. We're a little bit obsessed with it. And I do think that, that there are good reasons because we are teaching English after all. But I think that particularly with teenagers, that sensitivity to your students is really important. And if you reply to your students like this, then tomorrow when you ask how they are, they will not say anything to you at all. They'll just say, I'm fine, thank you, Dave. Okay, because I have shown complete insensitivity. It depends on your activity, okay? It depends what you're doing. It depends if it's, like I said, if it's a grammar exercise, you basically want them to get the correct answer. But if we're doing personalization, if we're getting our students to write maybe a personal email explaining about themselves, about their family, then let's forget the grammar for a second and let's definitely listen to what the students are saying. So I think it is really important. This is a joke, obviously, but at the same time, I think it's good for us to remember when we're teaching, am I really listening to what my student is saying, or am I listening to the English? Okay, depends on your activity, depends what you're trying to do, but it's always worth having in your mind, am I responding to the person? Because more than a student of English, your students are people. No? So first, yeah, you're a student as a person, and then they are a student of English. Okay, I mentioned before fast finishers, and personally I have a theory that fast finishers are one of the biggest problems in particularly larger classes of teenagers, maybe even in smaller classes too. The problem is that student finishes very quickly and teenagers get bored. They've got nothing to do. And that is when a student can start distracting other students, creating problems, simply because they are bored. They don't know what to do. They haven't got anything to do. They've got nothing productive to do. So how can we get around this problem? Well, the first thing is having open-ended activities. And I gave you one example with my instructions. Find at least 5 things. Find at least 5 things means it's open-ended. It doesn't just finish after 5, it carries on. Okay, that's point number 1. Point number 2, insisting on quality control. What I mean is sometimes the people who finish very fast haven't actually done the activity, the initial activity, very well. So just because a student says I finished, I always try and go up to that student, have a quick look. Is it good? Is it right? Is it pretty perfect? And if not, then I get the students, instead of doing something new, I tell them, okay, can you look at it again? Because I think you've got 2 or 3 mistakes. Can you check it? Okay, so some fast finishers, they finish fast, not because they find it easy and do it extremely well, but just because they're doing it carelessly. So I think that's something important to remember, okay? Insist on quality control. It's not just a question of finishing fast. You want students to finish fast, maybe, but to finish fast and correctly. The next thing, and I saw somebody said something similar. Yes, Suzanne, I think it was, said having extra activities ready. Yes, exactly. That's something that I have learned over the years. Have little things to keep those fast finishers active, to keep them busy. And also aiming high. So students finishing others, and actually, yes, Selina, you've just mentioned helping others. That's also like a great idea. Yes, definitely. So if you finish fast, have a look at what your partner's doing, and can you help them if they need help. So again, I'm just going to show you, because this obviously my teaching experience also goes into my books. And so this is from, again, the B1 plus level of my latest series for teenagers. You'll notice that we've got a critical thinkers activity. So I talked about getting students involved. So this is very important to get them completely involved in the activity. Then can you see in the middle on the right, there is something called Reach Higher. Okay, Reach Higher. And this sends them to the back of the book. And at the back of the book, if they finish this reading comprehension, which is true, false, if they finish that true false activity, then we give them an extra comprehension activity, which is great. It means that they're productive, they're busy, they have something to do, they have no reason to get distracted or to distract other people, and they're going to get more from the reading activity. And I think reading is a good example, isn't it? When you give a reading text to your students, some students finish really quickly and they have it all correct. And others are much, much slower. Sometimes in that situation, we say, okay, let's everybody stop. And I think that's not a good idea. If we get everybody to stop, it means that the slower students never finish activities. If they never finish activities, I think they will feel frustrated. They will get less practice than other students. And so it's really useful. Instead of stopping the whole class, let's give the fast finishers something else to do them. Thelia, you'll find out the name of the series when you get your certificate, okay? It depends on which part of the world you're in. So you will find out, okay? When you get your certificate, you'll find out more about my latest series, okay? Don't worry, I'm sure you'll find out. And if not, send me a message. Okay, now this is another activity. This is one of my favorite activities for fast finishers. I put this on the board, for example, in the corner of the board. And if somebody finishes very early, and I know that it's a good student who's done the activity well, then I give them this little game, okay? So finishing fast isn't, you don't get always punishment. Sometimes you get this game, which is quite fun, really. In fact, I'm going to ask you to do this quickly too. I'm sure you, oh, cyclopy, that's an interesting word. Right, Zoya, hello, Zoya. Right, we've got this word. Can you give me any words? Cycle, yeah. Any words that you can make from the letters in my word? Panda, well, that's nice. Cycle. Good morning, Uruguay. Idea, pad. Oh, you could have iPad. You've just made me think. iPad. DNA, that's nice. Okay, now I've got a question here. When does this activity finish? Well, I'll tell you the answer. The answer is never. Yeah, somebody said it, never. Thank you. The activity only finishes when I say you finish. Because if a student says, I've got 7 words, Dave, what do? I say, continue, because there are 20 words, there are 30 words, continue. And in fact, there are millions of words. Look, here are some of the words that you've mentioned. Look, at those are just a few, okay? So it's a great activity. It's quite fun. It's quite addictive. Students are doing something fun, interesting, they're involved. And really, it's not just a question of the activity, it's a question of classroom management, that the whole class is working productively while other people finish. So it's open-ended, it's fun, it keeps students busy, okay? Remember, by the way, that at the end of this session, next week, you will get an email with the PDF of this presentation. So you don't need to make notes or anything. You'll be able to take it away. Right, now, another thing that I believe very strongly in is the need in our classes to encourage positive collaboration, respect between students. Teamwork, that was the name of the very first book that I wrote 20 years ago or more. Teamwork is a great thing. Collaboration is a great thing. Teamwork is an essential life skill. When students, I think, are in primary, they do work in teams, but they are often a little bit more individual. They're sort of selfish. They're thinking about themselves, not thinking about the group. I think that it's really great. The teenage stage of school is a great stage to encourage students to work together, to collaborate. They don't always do it naturally, though, and I think we have to remind them. We have to remind them about respect. We have to remind them that they need to work together and help one another. Again, I'm going to make this point about online classes. I really think that online classes, the secret to online classes is that everybody helping one another. We have to help each other together, right, as a team. I've shown this in a few recent webinars, but this is a collaborative project which appears in my new series. And part of this project is developing the skill of collaboration. And in each project, we give a different strategy, a different thing to practice, if you like. For example, the first one you can see at the top, when you work in a team, decide the best way to divide the work equally and fairly. You could all search for different information, or some people could look for information while others are responsible for preparing artwork. Make sure everyone is happy with the distribution of work. In other words, when we work in teams, there are problems, there is tension, because maybe we think it's unfair. Yeah, so you will find out the name of the book. So it's, yeah. Yes, okay, so it's if you're in Spain, it's called Great Thinkers, and if you're in any other part of the world, it's called Gateway to the World. Yeah, Gateway to the World. Now, that collaboration, it's very, very useful to make sure that the students have the language to do that. So I think this is something that we forget. We might remind students to work together, but they don't actually have the English to do it. So you can see there the useful language. Are you happy doing this? I'd like to do this. Can I volunteer to do this? Why don't you do this? So let's get the students using the language and collaborating together. So I think, again, we tend to assume that all students always work together collaboratively, constructively, but I'm not sure that they do. And as I just said, I don't know if you would agree with me. At the moment, I'm teaching one class mask to mask, and I'm teaching one class online. When we're teaching online, I really think that it's emphasizing that we are a team, that we all need to help each other. If somebody has a problem, we help. And even, for example, sometimes, you know, when we have technical problems, I'm asking my students to help me, or to at least to understand why we're having the problem and to be patient. And I think that, you know, teaching online is such an extreme situation that we really need to help each other. Another little tip about teaching online is I always have a class list in front of me. I use the class list to make sure I involve all of the students. I use the class list to decide what order I'm going to ask my students. I'm going to use the class list so that I'm conscious all the time about having every single student they're in my mind, and I like write comments if I need to write anything, if somebody has a problem, if somebody is getting particularly well involved, or if a student is not so well involved. So having a class list as I'm speaking, I find it really useful to make a note of everything. Natalia, yes, my books are for teenagers, possibly young adults, but basically teenagers, yeah. Also, teaching online, keeping students motivated. I think it's really important. One thing that I learned very quickly is if you can't correct an activity, don't ask students to do it. So I'm generalizing here, but I think that what we often do with online teaching, we give the students lots and lots of work, but we don't actually then have time to correct it. When students realize this, I believe that they lose motivation. So it's better to go for quality more than quantity, I would say, in my personal opinion. Keep things clear, simple, and functional. What I mean with that is with technology. I confess that I am not the most technological teacher in the world. That's why I try and keep things as clear, as easy, and as simple and as functional as possible. Also because the technology often doesn't work, not because of me, but because of other different circumstances. So I generally try to keep things pretty basic, okay? As basic as necessary, so that at least we're always functioning. As long as we're doing work and we're doing constructive work, I'm happy with that. And on that note, I also believe that we really do need to celebrate every little victory. So, every time a student gives me a piece of work, I'm genuinely happy that they've done it. I haven't even seen if they've made many mistakes, but I know that I want them to do something. If they give me some work, I'm happy. Okay. And I think it's also, I hear a lot of teachers saying, like, online teaching, it's not the same as being in the classroom and blah, blah, blah. And it's absolutely true. It's definitely not. But I always say it's much better than nothing. And I think that, this is just a moment when we have to look very much on the positive side. Things are not ideal, but I'm trying to look as positively as possible at the situation. Now, I mentioned before the question of planning lessons carefully. And I do believe that when you plan lessons well, there are usually fewer problems in the classroom. My point about about planning lessons for teenagers is that we shouldn't just think in terms of language. We should think in terms of classroom management. Now, let me explain here, okay, with this slide. I think what we need to do to make sure that students are motivated, firstly, we need to make sure the topic is relevant to our students, okay? So relevance to the students is really important. If you're going to do a lesson about life insurance for 13-year-olds, it's probably not going to be the best lesson in history. So choosing something that is relevant to the age of our students. I do believe that almost any topic can be relevant. We need to find points of reference that make it relevant. Number two, I think we have to have a variety of skills work, not just because it's important that our students read and listen and write and speak, but because it means that we've got variety and we're keeping our students interested. If you do a 1-hour lesson where the students are reading for 30 minutes and writing for 30 minutes, I think your students will be going mad at the end of the lesson, teenage students, okay? So I think we need to keep that variety so that students are doing lots of different things. That also has a connection with number 3, variety of interaction. I sincerely believe that any good lesson will have some whole class work, will have some small group work, and some pair work. And I think that variety of interaction, which is an easy thing to do in English lessons, is a great ally for us. It helps us to do interesting classes. I sometimes see maybe a history lesson where the teacher is talking for 50 minutes. The students are maybe quiet, but I'm not sure that they're actually taking anything in because, again, they're not involved and they're not interacting. So I personally believe that variety of interaction is essential in a good English language lesson. Number 4, I'm going to talk in a second about pace and timing, particularly the idea of making sure that lessons are not too, we don't have this 30-minute block of reading, for example, because students have lots of energy and in the end they get bored. And finally, warmers and coolers. Now, we all know what warmers are. Warmers are activities that get students excited. Coolers, somebody asked what a cooler is. A cooler is an activity which calms the students down. It gets them listening, it gets them maybe writing, probably they're doing it individually, and the students are sort of like, the energy level goes down, not up. And I do believe that a good lesson for teenagers has probably as many coolers as warmers, okay? So often we think in terms of coolers, often we think about warmers for teenagers and not coolers. So here's an example of a warmer. Here's one of my favorite warmers, which I do when I do my vocabulary session around the world. Some of you might have seen me doing this activity. Vocabulary tennis. You can have 2 teams. It's a great warmer for the beginning of the class. You can have lots of smaller teams if you prefer. But we've got this prefix miss. What does the prefix miss mean? What meaning does it add to a word? Wrong, exactly, not correctly, exactly, thank you. Now, let's imagine that we've got a class, okay, of 20 students, and we've got 10 students in each team. We've got team A, we've got team B. What happens is, like tennis, team A gives you one word, for example, misunderstand. That means the ball goes to team B. So they have to give me another word that has miss, and you're writing lots of them down, which is great. So team B says miss here. Now, if one of the teams repeats a word, then they lose. If one of the teams gives you an incorrect word, they also lose. And if a team cannot think of a new word, they also lose, okay? Now, team B says miss here, and team A says misconception, which is a great word, yeah? A wrong idea, a misconception. Team B says mispronounce, okay, and so that's good. So the ball is back with team A. And then team A says Miss America. Now, is that correct? I think you would agree Miss America is not correct, okay? That means that team A are losing love 15. Okay, so that's a nice idea. We're going to do another one, okay? Words with a suffix ness. Can you obviously, what type of word is ness? Is it an adjective, an adverb, a noun? Noun, thank you, Natia. So we've got team A gives me kindness. Okay, team B gives me sadness. Team A gives me darkness. Team B gives me happiness. And team A gives me Loch Ness. Now, is that correct? Unfortunately, Loch Ness is not correct. Team A is having a bad day, okay? So they're losing love 30. Okay, you get the idea, okay? Very simple activity. By the way, you can do this with any group of words. So you could do the same with, for example, rooms in a house. So you have kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, toilet, garage, yeah? So it's a nice activity. It's fun. There's a competition. The students get quite excited, okay? Now, this is an example of the same thing, but it's a cooler. It's like our dictation at the beginning. We have 4 columns, miss, under, ness, and ship. And what I do is I dictate words and the students write the word in the correct column. So if I said dark, which column does it go in? 1, 2, 3, or 4? In 3, of course. And if I said friend would be in column 4, okay? Now, if you think about that activity, it's very similar in terms of language to my warmer. Somebody said, what happens if they get very competitive? That's why it's a warmer, so it can get quite noisy. The point that I'm trying to make is that those activities are nice, but sometimes you need to have activities which calm your students down, okay? So this type of a column dictation is a great way of doing that. Okay, I got 2 or 3 more things to say, and then we're going to have a quick maybe question and answer or go into the breakout rooms, okay? So my last 2 points, and these are very obvious points. They're extremely obvious points. My first obvious point is that teens are teenagers. So games like the ones that we've just seen, they can maximize involvement, motivation, energy levels, interest. So I personally am a big fan of activities which get students playing and enjoying English. So not all of the time, but what I do is I often give them a little game-like activity, and then we go into some important stuff from the book. I'm not going to show you the next activity. I'm going to move on to something different because of time. The last thing that I was going to mention again is that, as I said before, you are the adult in the room, and students learn not just from what we teach. So when you walk into the room, you are a role model to your students. And I think it's very important that students do learn from how we teach, okay? So if you are good at listening, I think your students will also be good at listening. If you show respect to your students, I think your students will learn respect too. And in that sense, what I wanted to finish with today in this session is just thinking about this. What do you think students want from us? What do you think they expect us to be? Can you just put in what type of person? That's nice to know, Andrew. Friendly, fun, empathy, understanding, just, caring. Right. Well, you're going to get a link to this really extremely interesting article from the Times Educational Supplement. These are the 10 things that they say are the top 10. Remember, this is what students are asking for, not necessarily teachers. And you might disagree with some of the things here. You might think that we shouldn't be some of these things. But basically, students want us to be funny, fair, understanding, helpful, which you've mentioned, good listener, inspiring, knowledgeable, which I think is pretty important, patient, passionate, and fun. And I think that the interesting thing about this list, I'm not sure if I agree with all of those things. I'm not sure if I agree about, is funny the most important thing that a teacher should be? I'm not convinced that that's right. I think, I don't know, funny and knowledgeable, they go nicely together. For me, that's a nice mixture. But I think the important point to remember is that this is how teenagers feel about their teacher. And I think the interesting thing above all is I think they want us to be quite nice, helpful people, right? Somebody's mentioned fair. I think fair is extremely important. Sophie, yeah, fair is extremely important, isn't it? Actually, yeah, somebody's just mentioned a good sense of humor. Zoya, yeah, but not funny. Yeah, that's also a nice way of putting it. So I'm not saying that I necessarily agree with this list, but I think it's really useful because it gives an indication of what students are looking for from us. And in fact, one of the post tasks that you will get after this session is thinking about this list and also thinking about what makes a great learner. Okay, so that's another thing that we have got lots of opinions about, right? They say what a great teacher is, but what's a great learner? This is the complete list. I'm not going to show it you now because you will get access to this in your post-session task. So does anybody know what the perfect teacher looks like? Can anybody guess what it looks like? And it doesn't look like me, okay? But any idea what that? No, there's not me. No. Here it is, okay? This is the perfect teacher. And I think this is why our job is so complicated, because in every lesson, we have to be all of these things, right? So we have to be a bit of a clown sometimes because students want us to be funny. We have to be a good speaker. We have to be knowledgeable, clever. We have to be caring, like the mother at the bottom. We have to be like a referee, right? And we have to be very creative, like Mozart. When we plan our lessons, we have to be creative too. And I particularly like the yoga, the woman performing yoga at the top, because that's also what we have to be. Okay, we've come to the end of my session.